the production of the immense accumulation of commodities. Well, remember, you've got to be able to sell that as well. And Ewan looks at the period at at the end of the 19th century, start of the 20th century, for when advertising arose as an institution to deal with this problem of too many goods. How do we solve the problem of too many goods? Well, we'll solve them by making sure that people want those goods. This is Stuart Ewan. Let's go to quote number 2. He says, such social production of consumers represented a shift in social and political priorities which has since characterized much of the life of American industrial capitalism. The functional goal of national advertising was the creation of desires and habits, in tune with the need for mass distribution that accompanied the development of mass production capabilities. Advertising was trying to produce in readers needs which would dependently fluctuate with the expanding marketplace. Okay, advertising was trying to produce in readers needs which would dependently fluctuate with the expanding marketplace. As the marketplace expanded, needs also would expand as well. Needs and wants would also expand. It's a relatively simple argument. Why does advertising exist? To make sure the society doesn't collapse. To make sure that there is enough demand, to make sure that the things that corporations can produce, to make sure that the profits of corporations remain high by creating enough of a demand for the incredible supply that they have. That's stage one. Relatively straightforward. Second part of the argument. How then does advertising do this? How does advertising go about creating this demand, if that is what advertising is supposed to do? Now remember, it's just a story. Okay, I don't want you to get too carried away. It's just a story. And there is an equally powerful story that emerges from the defenders of advertising that says, actually, advertising doesn't do very much. Advertising doesn't really, and so that's an open question that we have to figure out where the evidence lies. The second stage of the argument. How does advertising work? How does it create demand? Well, one of the major ways in which people think about this is actually advertisers know more about us than we know about ourselves. That is that advertisers are able to manipulate us because of all this knowledge that they have of human behavior. Actually, there's a very interesting film which I would recommend to you. It's kind of a weird film. It's called How to Get Ahead in Advertising. And it's a film, actually, it's now about 15 years old. It's a British film. And it features an ad executive who he's having a bit of a mental block. His agency is having to sell pimple cream. He just doesn't know how to do it. He doesn't know how to sell pimple cream and cream for boils. He's going to try to figure out, and so he just can't figure out how to do it. And then ultimately he gets it. He says, I know, first of all, we'll make pimples cool. So first of all, they have to run a campaign that makes pimples and boils cool so that people will actually have pimples and boils. And then they've got the solution to it when they say it's going to be a problem. Now, as I said, what happens with him? He's an actor. The character is played by someone who actually is quite well known now. It's Richard Grant, British actor, and he starts to have a kind of bit of a crisis of conscience around what he's doing. And the reason it's called How to Get Ahead in Advertising is he starts to grow a second head on his shoulder. And the second head is the evil conscience of how they're going to do that. That's why it's called How to Get Ahead in Advertising. It's a very interesting film. This is a clip. This is the opening part of it, where the advertiser he's speaking to his staff about what they're going to do and about not around this campaign, but about advertising in general.
Let me try and clarify some of this for you. Best Company supermarkets are not interested in selling wholesome foods. They are not worried about the nation's health. What is concerning them is that the nation appears to be getting worried about its health. And that is what's worrying Bestco. Because Bestco wants to go on selling them what it always has, i.e., the white breads, baked beans, canned foods, and that suppurating, fat-squirting little heart attack traditionally known as the British sausage. So, how can we help them with that? Clearly, we are looking for a label. We need a label brimming with health, and everything from a nosh pot to a white sliced will wear one with pride. And although I'm aware of the difficulties of coming to terms with this, it must be appreciated from the beginning that even the nosh pot must be low in something. And if it isn't, it must be high in something else. And that is its health-giving ingredient we will sell. Which brings me to my final question. Who are we trying to sell this to? Answer: we are trying to sell this to the archetypal average housewife, she who fills her basket. What you have here is a 22-year-old pretty girl. What you need is a taut slob, something on foot deodorizers in a brassiere.
I'm not quite sure we can go along with that, Mr. Bagley. I mean, if you look at, like, the market research...
I don't need to look at the market research. I've lived with 13.5 million housewives for 15 years, and I know everything about them. She's 37 years old. She has 2.3 children, 1.6 of which will be girls. She uses 16 feet 6 inches of toilet tissue a week and fucks no more than 4.2 times a month. She has 7 radiators and is worried about her weight, which is why we have her on a diet. And because we have her on a diet, we also encourage her to reward herself with the little treats. And she deserves them. Because anyone existing on 1,200 calories of artificial synthetic orange-flavored waffle a day deserves a little treat. We know it's naughty, but you do deserve it. Go on, darling, swallow a bum. And she does. And the instant she does, the guilt cuts in. So here we are again with our diet. It's a vicious but quite wonderful circle, and it adheres to only one rule. Whatever it is, sell it. And if you want to stay in advertising, by God, you'd better learn that.
That is the major argument, or one of the major ways, is that they know more about us than we do ourselves, and they operate beneath our level of awareness. In fact, that's so. In answer to that, the first answer that's given to us, how does advertising work? Well, it works beneath our level of awareness. So we're not even aware of the impact of advertising. We're not even aware of all the knowledge that they have and how the manipulation works. One of the first person actually to really talk about this in the 1950s was an author called Vance Packard, who wrote really the first really kind of critical book about advertising and about the role that the research plays within this. And he called his book The Hidden Persuaders. And so that's one, according to this argument, that's one way in which it's done, which is we're not even aware of it. Let's go to quote number 3 from the handout for today. Okay, he says, this is Packard. He says, many of us are being influenced and manipulated far more than we realize in the patterns of our everyday lives. Large-scale efforts are being made, often with impressive success, to channel our unthinking habits, our purchasing decisions, and our thought processes by the use of insights gleaned from psychiatry and the social sciences. Typically, these efforts take place beneath our level of awareness. Okay, typically, these efforts take place beneath our level of awareness. It actually doesn't arise to the level whereby we can actually interact with them as ideas. I read a little quote from an author called Stuart Ewan a little while ago, and Ewan is really one of our major scholars to do with advertising. He's also written a fantastic book on public relations as well, in a similar kind of way. And Ewan actually argues, he says, there's a lot of, when people talk about how, in terms of psychology and advertising, there's a lot of focus on Freudian psychology. There's a lot of focus on, sexuality and those kinds of things. And he says, actually, the major psychology that's in play in American consumer culture isn't Freudian psychology. It's Pavlovian psychology. And this is what he means by that. This is Ewan.
It's one of the reasons why, I actually think the relationship between sort of Pavlovian psychology and 20th century America is something that needs much more exploration. Because there's a lot of talk about the influence of Freudian theory and psychoanalysis and theories of the unconscious and instinct theory and so on and so forth. But I think one of the things that's often been left out of the analysis is that the ultimate psychology which runs through our society is a Pavlovian psychology. And just as Pavlov's dogs were trained to salivate at the ringing of a bell when they would be fed, and then after a while, all you had to do was ring the bell and they thought food and they salivated. That's basically the way in which communication strategies operate in the United States from the 20s on. You start creating stimuli which are designed to make people salivate.
Remember Pavlov's dog, the famous experiment that is the dog, you feed the... You wait till the dog's hungry, you feed the dog, and as you feed the dog, you ring a bell. You feed the dog and you ring a bell. So the dog starts to associate the bell with being hungry and being fed. Then after a while, you actually don't even need the food. All you do is you ring the bell and the dog starts to salivate. And that's what Ewan argues is happening with advertising. That is, they've come up with, that they have knowledge of triggers that they can use in essentially to get our reaction without us even thinking about it. To get a reaction from us without even those conscious thought processes kicking in. It's actually it is interesting as a because some people often say Pavlov's dog is it's too simple as a way of describing consumer behavior, and you need something more complex. Well, perhaps you do, and perhaps you don't. Now, there's also a lot of concern within this first argument. That is, it works beneath our level of awareness, and some of you are most probably aware of this. There is, seeing this, there's a lot of concern with subliminal advertising. That is, this works advertising that really does work beneath our level of awareness, that we can't even consciously perceive it. Now, this argument, though, the concern around subliminal advertising actually started off in 1957 with a guy called James Vickery, and what he claimed to have done. Actually, it started off with, I'll tell you up front, it's a hoax, and you must probably heard, and it's one of those urban legends now. You heard of this, the idea that you could put single frames in a film of a hamburger or whatever, and the people would watch this and they would be hungry afterwards, but they didn't know why, in that kind of Pavlovian way. Well, this was a guy called James Vickery, who in 1957 did an experiment where he projected every 5 seconds for 1/3000th of a second a phrase, "hungry, eat popcorn," on the frame of a movie. And he also did drink Coca-Cola. Actually, this is what the movie frame would look like. And he claimed that this increased sales of popcorn and Coca-Cola. As it turns out, that his results were totally fabricated. There was no such evidence, and then what he was really trying to do was make a lot of money for himself by trying to sell this this technology through his own company called the Subliminal Projection Company. But for a long time, and you must probably have heard this experiment as a success. Well, it wasn't. It worked it worked in terms of selling, in terms of getting people concerned about this kind of technology, but there was no evidence at all that it actually worked. We'll see why. The major other name associated with this in subliminal advertising is a person called Brian Wilson Keyes, who in 1973 wrote a book called Subliminal Seduction, which sold over 1 million copies, and then wrote some other books as well, which also sold a huge number of copies. And what Wilson claimed, or what he argued, was that in fact a lot of advertising and a lot of what appears in the media actually also has other messages as well. That there are messages embedded at the level that our conscious mind can't pick it up, but our subconscious mind can pick it up. And therefore